their idea, their vision in general of empowering black people, collectivizing black people, unifying black people, right? I have noticed how I'd never speak out against that. Someone asked why I hold back in my videos that reference Dr. Umar. Why am I not as vicious as I could be? And the answer is because I have honor. I have a strong sense of honor and self-restraint. Just because I could do something, just because I have the power to do something, doesn't mean that I should or would. I personally have nothing against the guy or what he is trying to accomplish for black people. I have heard about some failures of his, or where he has stumbled in what he's tried to accomplish. But as I am a man who has also stumbled throughout the process of accomplishing something real for both himself and others, I hold none of that against him. Now, I'd imagine with his ideological bias, right? And again, this is not me saying that it's not actually personal against him. We all have an ideological bias. But with his, I would imagine I would come off as extremely selfish. Whereas somebody else from a different perspective would say that I am more selfless. It depends on, again, perspective. All right. With that in mind, right, I'm freestyling this. Even though I have this part of this written, I'm freestyling this. With that in mind, I am someone who objectively has worked extremely hard, excruciating hours to build something not just for myself, but for others as well. Therefore, right, continuing on, I am not actually a quote-unquote hater of his. I only have an issue when, not simply him personally, but when the archetype of people like him in general do either one or both of two things. One, commit an act that directly affects my life without any consent on my part. Or two, make a sweeping statement or publish literature as if they are the authority on how I actually think. Okay, so with the former, committing an act that directly affects my life without any consent on my part, I'm referencing Dr. Umar the most because he's the only person I know, and this is actually to his credit. Like there are multiple dimensions you can view the positive and negatives to anyone's character. Right, and I would ask that to be done to me as well, with respect. He is a man of action in that regard. But the action that caught my attention toward Dr. Umar more than other pro-black leaders that I would otherwise speak out against or have spoken out against in the past is that when he made the claim that he wanted to petition to banish interracial marriage. Okay, not supporting interracial marriage is one thing. I think if someone like that has absolutely every right. I know he has absolutely every right to not support it. My issue is not with someone not supporting some element of my life. My issue is when somebody oversteps their bounds to try to violate some aspect of my life by force, when I have done them no wrong, right? As if they own me or something, as if they have an actual right to what I do with my own blood, right? Example, trying to illegalize my marriage, right? Because I am married to a white woman, when it is my right to be married to whomever I want to be if we are consenting adults and I have done neither him nor his followers any wrong, while my genes do not belong to them to dictate what should be done with them while claiming to want to liberate me, right? I am not a possession. I am a human being. 99.99% of those people, either people like Dr. Umar or their followers, right? Again, I emphasize people like Dr. Umar, meaning I'm not only speaking about Dr. Umar. I'm speaking about all the major pro-black leaders. I'm talking about Louis Farrakhan. I'm talking about Ibram X. Kendi, the whole pro-black community, separate from the black community, because one is psychographic and ideological, one is ethnic. Where the pro-black community is a psychographic segmentation of the overall black community. They're not one and the same. Even though it seems like I do use them interchangeably at times, I do fully acknowledge that they are not the same. 99.99% of those people I've never even met in person, yet they delusionally think that they have a claim on what I should be doing with my life, with my own blood, with my own DNA. Right? To use social clout to hijack what I have every right to do with my own bloodline is not the act of a liberator. It is the act of a possessive, insecure tyrant who egomaniacally convinced himself that he is the good guy. Right? Not supporting something, not promoting something, or being against something in your politics is one thing. But, that is your right. But then having the right to an opinion while actively trying to leverage force and coercion to take someone else's right, especially on American soil, is evil. There's no way around that. Right? It is the possession of the Jungian shadow and the pursuit of a utilitarian good that is not actually good at all. Right? It is to say one thing with one's words, yet demonstrate with one's actions that he has no actual respect for individual human rights. With that context in mind, what would the actual difference be between people like him, in this case being Dr. Umar, and everyday corrupt African warlords? Right? At least the warlord has the strength of character to just shoot people themselves. Right? People like Umar, on the other hand, would rather petition to use America's governmental guns to enforce his will instead. Because that is what would happen in the scenario that a petition like what Umar wants to push gets passed when people like me inevitably disobey. Right? Our quote-unquote great Pan-African liberator would have people like me mass executed and or imprisoned by white people, which is the exact opposite of what leaders like that claim to stand for. All right, so imagine that. Let's just say, now the chances of it actually going through are virtually infinitesimally small anyway. But let's just entertain the hypothetical in which it would. Yeah, I'm just going to say, oh, well, you know what? It's been a good run, honey. I guess we're just going to have to go our separate ways now. We're going to have to break up our family because Dr. Umar won with his petition. Right? Bye. No, that's not what's realistically going to happen. What's realistically going to happen is that I'm going to remain a family man. Okay? I'm going to remain with nothing in my household is going to change, with the exception of one day I'm going to get a knock on the door by law enforcement officers forcefully breaking up my family, ruining our lives. And if I try to resist, I will be shot at gunpoint or thrown away in prison. All right, and then for someone like Dr. Umar to claim that he is a liberator is just no, that's not liberation. I fully support Dr. Umar's or other pro-black leaders like him. I 100% support his right to try to convince as many people as possible to stay away from interracial marriage. Sure, I'll hand him the mic, right? I'll give him a megaphone if that's what he would like to do, right? 100%. I am for free speech. I don't agree with him, but I'm 100% and for. And I'm freestyling now. It's why there was a shift in the camera. I'm not reading anything. I 100% support freedom of speech for people I disagree with. Right. I am not going to try to silence someone like Dr. Umar. That's the difference between me and a true hater, per se. Like, I would never try to silence Dr. Umar. I would never try to deplatform him. I would never try to cancel him. I would just simply say, hey, man, this is where you're being possessed by your own Jungian shadow, and you're not as moral as you think you are when you try to do X, Y, and Z actions that will yield the complete opposite of what you claim to stand for, right? And with that in mind, sorry, I have fluctuating accents. I'm not trying to manipulate my voice. I've traveled the world for 16 years now, actually. In my previous videos, I would say 15 years. No, I've been traveling the world actively because I'm in Europe right now. even though my primary residence is in America. I have been traveling the world for 16 years. I speak multiple languages. I apologize if it seems like there's a lack of authenticity with the fluctuations in intonations and pronunciations in my voice, just weird shifts in my vocal tone. Because remember, Mandarin, right? It's the Mandarin Chinese is tonal, right? And other languages I speak have different. I mean, just the phonemes that I use sometimes will shift and they will seem inconsistent, but they're not meant to be. That is not actually, in my particular case, that does not mean that I'm putting on an act or that I'm being dishonest in some kind. No, it's like if you traveled the world for 16 years, almost completely consecutively 16 years, lived in a multitude of different countries and learned their languages to greater or lesser extents, you all of a sudden try to come and speak English. You're going to have some mild accents floating around in the way that you speak as well. So that's not intentional. But anyway, that is when I speak out against people like Dr. Umar, right? And that's not personal. But to be honest, if it really were to come down to that, I'm reading now, I would kill as many people as needed to defend my love and freedom. I would become the monster people like Umar would make me. I would do strategically great and terrible things for my wife and family, William Wallace style. Right? And I wouldn't go William Wallace on Europeans. I would go William Wallace on people like Umar. Because at that point, you're not just simply expressing a difference in opinion and trying to win in the free market of ideas to get as many people on your side. At that point, you are initiating force against me via proxy when I have done people like that no wrong. Right? People like Umar have the entire road to accomplish their objectives in life. I have this one bike lane. Right? I have a bike lane. I don't even have the road. I have a bike lane. Minding my own business, doing nothing other than simply stating my own opinions on things, which I equally have a right to do. And the moment someone like Umar basically says, "Nah, screw you, I'm going to take your bike lane by force," not by my own hand, but I'm going to hire these white people, because that's what the government is by majority. I'm going to hire these white people while preaching, ranting and raving about how we should not rely on white people to enforce by gunpoint my will upon you while I claim myself to be a liberator, right? That's when we have problems, because that's not freedom of speech. That is the initiation of force for a political ideology while using the government as a proxy. Right? No, I would absolutely kill as many people as needed to defend my family, to keep us together, to defend my love and freedom. Right? And then perhaps our descendants, those who are left, can debate about which black lives mattered. In those cases, I speak to defend my constitutional right to individual freedom for the love of my wife and the psychological stability of my children, as well as to honor the memory and legacy of what my black ancestors marched and died for, that people like Umar might not even consciously realize they twist in the pursuit of their own personal agendas. Right? How dare they? Right? And then there's the second way. There is the latter. Right? So I only speak out against pro-black leaders, at least now at this point in my evolution in character, and the stability of my own psychology, when they try to initiate force in a way that directly affects me, my life, my peace and freedom, or two, make a sweeping statement or publish literature as if they are the authority on how I actually think. Right? And this isn't actually about Umar. This section is more about people like Ibram X. Kendi. Right? Right? Speakers like Umar, Ibram X. Kendi, Louis Farrakhan, etc. They don't actually know what it is like to be me or someone like me. They didn't wake up every morning to a white mother. They weren't born with both Asian and European genes that play a direct role in affecting how they perceive reality. They do not actually know how to calculate and account for any of that. Right? Their psychoanalytical biases include a lot of projection and assumptions that we even perceive reality the same way. Assumptions that are not based on science, but what are actually the bygone Jim Crowian laws, political ideology, etc., while merely charismatically presenting themselves before large crowds of people who simply don't know any better. And those people will never know any better unless someone like me is brave enough to say something. Right? In those cases, even if my audience is small, I speak to correct the record on the psychology of people like me, because those pro-black talking head figures are human, flawed, biased, and detached from people like me. So I refuse to die and allow charismatic speakers with an agenda to stand on my grave as a podium while pontificating to others about the psychology of people like me, as if they actually know what they are talking about, without me leaving behind a little note for future generations that explains why and how they are incorrect. I'm not talking about when they're speaking, when they stay in their lane and they speak on their actual realm of expertise. Right. And this goes for Umar. He might be a clinical psychologist, but that doesn't mean that he's all knowing for, the world of clinical psychology is based, it's a soft science, right? I'm in the realm of the hard sciences as a physicist, but the realm of clinical psychology is a soft science, which also, besides the voting methodology of determining mental illnesses in the DSM-5, there is in fact a heavy scientific methodology for how they do that, and that the science changes all the time based on new evidence. Right? That's what makes science what it is, soft or hard. Right? Which means that when people like Umar speak, when people like Dr. Umar speak on blacks in general, and then people like them, or Ibram X. Kendi, whatever, when they overstep their bounds to speak to crowds, talking about mixed race people like me and what we're thinking, what's going on in our heads, no, it's all just merely hypothesis and theory, right? Because they're not actually the same as me. They don't actually know that, and there's very limited studies on people like me, very limited. Not only because our ethnic populations are so tiny, but because of the consent necessary for parents to give up their children to scientific observation in that manner. When people like me were born on the fringes of society as outliers and glitches in the systemic matrix by default, right? So psychologists in general cannot make sweeping statements with any sort of credibility, true credibility, academic credibility. They can only observe, extrapolate, and give their best educated guesses based on that extrapolation. But seldom are they honest about that. Right? I'm freestyling all this right now. Right? I'm not reading anything. I'm going back and forth with reading Facebook posts. All right. I am not leaving a vacuum upon my death for them to fill with their lies and nonsense. Right? I do not speak to attack them. I speak to defend myself and mine. Understand how neither one of those two scenarios are personal. Right? And let me say them again. The first scenario in which I speak out against the pro-black leaders is when they commit an act that directly affects my life without any consent on my part, especially with the use of force, either directly or indirectly. Or two, when they make sweeping statements or publish literature as if they are the authority on how people like me actually think, when in 99% of cases, they don't even talk to people like me in order to make those accurate assessments. Right? But they'll present themselves with the art of rhetoric, the Aristotelian art of rhetoric, to move crowds of people and present themselves as if they either A, represent me, or when I never consented to that at all, or B, know what I'm thinking when they're completely detached from, they're empathetically detached. They lack empathy for people like me based on what they assume to be true because it's true for them, not me, aka a projection based on flawed axiomatic assumptions. Right? So when I speak against them in either one of these two scenarios, understand how neither one of those two scenarios are personal. I speak only when they overstep their bounds with their rhetoric because no one else is actually as qualified to speak for me but me. And I gave them no consent to do otherwise. But when it comes to the idea, their vision in general of empowering black people, collectivizing black people, unifying black people, right? I have noticed how I never speak out against that. I never speak out against that. Only when they say something that could be used as psyops to convince my children that they are absolutely correct in their way of thinking, when I know that they are not. And I refuse to die without leaving my children a little note that says, hey, you are allowed to think differently.